It's great, Dan. My pleasure to be here. Well, the first things you want to look at is increasing your protein intake. You want to be on a high protein diet. I wrote an article called the optimal protein intake for bodybuilders, and there I showed that you don't need really high amounts. At least, well, it's still over twice the RDA, and many people in bodybuilding circles consider that low protein. But it's still twice what a sedentary person needs, basically. So that's basically what you want to consume at a minimum, or at least you want to be in that range. And the second thing you really want to do is get a good sense of what calories are, how many calories are in food, how many energy you're consuming, because there are a lot of interesting things and fine tuning, but the basic principle that you just cannot avoid with weight loss is thermodynamics, energy in, energy out. You need to be in an energy deficit to lose mass, which includes fat loss. So you need to create an energy deficit. That's just the absolute basis of losing weight and losing fat. It's 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kilogram. Research usually finds that 1.6 gram per kilogram total body weight, that is, suffices. And to my knowledge, no study has still yet found any benefits of consuming more than that, at least not in terms of muscle growth or creating a higher level of protein balance. And I advise 1.8 gram per kilogram to basically include a safety margin so that you are sure that you consume enough, because protein is one of those things. That's why I mentioned it first. It's just extremely important. You need protein to build protein. So if you want to build muscle, high protein it's the building block. I think it's very rare. You do find individuals, I think especially those women who have been following a very low fat diet for a very prolonged period at a very low body fat percentage, combine that with a lot of cardio and just high mental anxiety in general. And in those individuals, you do find that there seems to be something inexplicably going on that greatly reduces energy output, because I've seen it happen, especially in these kind of women, that I basically drop all the cardio and actually increase energy intake, and they get better results. And that's probably what research also finds, is that there is basically a maximum level, a maximum where you can push your body, where if you decrease energy intake further below that point, basically all that happens is that your metabolism decreases further, and you're wasting muscle mass instead of actually losing more body fat. I should say, however, that I do think that is quite an exceptional scenario. If you've been dieting to a normal level, you haven't been doing contest prep, then it's very rare that you actually permanently do any damage to your metabolism, in the sense that your thyroid becomes dysfunctional or anything like that. So it's almost always the case that the metabolic adaptations that occur with weight loss, they can be undone with a proper diet. I mean, training or diet-wise? I generally start with a fat loss diet. Many of these kind of guys, they think they need to build muscle mass, but really the major improvement in their physique that they want to see comes about with fat loss, especially when you get to six-pack levels. That's when most people actually look a lot bigger, even though they're losing body weight. So I think the fat loss is generally the priority, and you want to combine that with an effective training program. And then you can actually, especially in the scenario if you already had a lot of muscle mass before, you have muscle memory, then you can actually quite effectively gain muscle mass while being in an energy deficit. Yeah, then you want to transition the program, usually emphasize training more. You want to transition into an energy surplus instead of a deficit. Generally, during a bulk, people will have a higher volume tolerance, so they can tolerate a more stressful training program. So that's also what you want to change. Or you can definitely, right. I mean, especially at the beginner level, you can still get quite decent results with just one session. However, I should say that that session is then like a balls out training session. It's not, the same as if you were to spread that same volume out over 6 sessions. You could do it very easily. You could have very long rest intervals, and it's a completely different kind of session than if you're gonna do, your week's optimal volume in one session, or at least the week's optimal training stress. So if you go balls out once per week, you can get good results as a beginner. You can transition into a physique that's still definitely fit for the general population, and then you would quickly need to go to about 2 sessions, I'd say. Now, with 2 sessions, you can get really far. You can definitely get to like what people consider celebrity physique. Most non-fitness models, you can obtain that kind of physique with just 2 sessions. Again, those are hard sessions if you really want to push muscle growth. And all the way on the upper end, you can still get by with 3 sessions. For still, if you want to absolutely maximize muscle mass, then I'd say that more is basically better. Not just because you're doing more and more volume, but because you can spread out the volume over more days and you have higher quality workouts. But the benefits for I should say there are diminishing returns to increasing your training frequency like that. So with just one session as a beginner, you can get very far. And with 3 sessions, that's all in theory you would need if you just want to make progress and you're fine with taking a couple of years to do it instead of, I want to completely transform my body in these couple months. Yeah, then you're definitely looking at a full body training session. Um, Even if men aren't extremely motivated to train their lower body, usually they will be over time, they will become more motivated. So that's usually what I tell my clients. If someone says, I don't really care about leg work, I say, okay, that's fine. So we won't do a lot of leg work. What I do like to do, for example, in people that really say they don't care about leg work, is high intensity sprints on the bike ergometer, because that's a great way to burn a lot of calories. It's actually quite a decent leg stimulus, and many people don't hate it as much, especially as a finisher of the workout. That's a great way to get some sneaky leg work in for those, basically. But you're looking at a session with lots of compound lifts. So I don't really like the deadlift unless time is really limited, because it's a good jack of all trades exercise, but it's not very effective for all the muscle groups that it does train. Squats, or at least the squat variation, should almost always be in there. An overhead press, bench press, looking at a vertical pull, or more specifically, usually chin-ups or pull-ups. Rows, I'm also not a major fan of. I think chin-ups and pull-ups are way underrated compared to rows. And you basically train the entire back with chin-ups except the upper traps, which you can target quite effectively with an overhead press. So you're looking at a workout like that with heavy compound work, these kind of compound lifts. And it's better to do at least one hard set of more exercises in this situation than focusing on, for example, just squats. That's what you see in some programs. They say you just got to squat, especially if for men that where the upper body has the focus. That's not get you a good upper body physique. So you want, because of the diminishing returns to exercise volume, you want to still want to get quite a few exercises in there. It's BayesianBodybuilding.com. But I wrote an article on the science of binge drinking because usually that's what it is. The definition of binge drinking is actually for men usually 3 consumptions in a single day, and for women often 2. So medically speaking, we are usually talking about binge drinking, and you can quite effectively mitigate the effects of binge drinking. For one, if possible, do it on a rest day, and 2, if possible, make sure you are in energy deficit, because the thing with alcohol is that it quite significantly impairs fat burning from actual fat. But as long as you are in energy deficit, you will still lose body fat. So it's very bad to be in an energy surplus when there is alcohol in your system, because then the excess energy is very likely to be stored as body fat. But if you are in energy deficit, the effects aren't that pronounced. And if you then also time it away from your training session, then the effects are really mitigated quite effectively, because it has a very temporal effect. If you go binge drinking right after your workout, the effect is a lot more severe. Not nearly as severe as you might expect, because there are quite a few studies that show that the effects of binge drinking aren't that detrimental to muscle growth. I'd say that the main detrimental effect is actually just the amount of calories that are in the alcohol. So for muscle growth, you are looking at suppressed testosterone production and suppressed protein balance. Those are definitely negative things, but usually protein balance, you're looking at 20% reductions, things like that. Testosterone, similar kind of numbers. It's not like you go, it's not like you're circumcised after a drinking session. So not that bad, but the calories quickly add up. Fortunately, if you drink light beers or dry wines and spirits, you can easily save about 50% of calories. And the things you really want to avoid, unless you really, really like them, are like the special kind of mojitos and cocktail drinks where they actually put extra coconut oil and that kind of stuff in. And you can be looking at, just like certain kinds of Starbucks coffee, hundreds of calories per drink. And that adds up really fast. Yeah, I think women should train at a very abstract fundamental level. They should train like men. You're still looking at heavy weight training. You know, that's basically the similarity. You're still looking at strength training programs. However, a lot of research has found that women tend to be more type 1 fiber dominant. They tend to have greater endurance, tend to have greater work capacity. They're more resistant to muscle damage. And these factors usually contribute to them benefiting more from a less explosive training tempo, less use of very high intensities. And by very high, I usually mean 90 to 100% of 1RM. So definitely no, we're definitely not talking about women using pink weights in the special room where the guys don't come because the weights don't go heavy, but not, powerlifter weights unless the woman is actually training. The woman is actually training for powerlifting. So you're looking at usually a slightly less explosive tempo. They can get by with shorter rest intervals. They can rack up more total volume. You especially see this with women that are interested in training their glutes, getting a good booty. They want to and can tolerate quite a high training volume for that. So women shouldn't be as afraid of overtraining as men. Well, it's a primary storage hormone, but I think many people over extrapolate these effects into thinking insulin is like what makes you fat. And if you eat a lot of carbs, it's like the latest trend is high carb is bad. It varies every couple of years, but the latest trend, I think, in the States at least, is high carb is bad because insulin. And the idea is that you stimulate a large insulin release, and this is what makes you fat. But you are still restricted by thermodynamics. Insulin cannot create fat. It simply stores energy that is in your body. So you are still looking at the effects of energy balance. You can elevate insulin all you want if you are in an energy deficit, and you will lose body weight unless there is something seriously wrong with you. And usually then you're looking at like severe problems like a tumor that causes excessive insulin production. But by and large, the ratio of carbs to fat is not nearly as influential as total energy balance. So it's a storage hormone, yes, and it's also actually anabolic. It can help you build muscle mass. But I think the effects within the physiological range are widely exaggerated. And the supraphysiological range is when you're talking about pro bodybuilders injecting insulin along with a mixture of many other steroids or performance enhancing drugs. And that's when you can get major effects. And similarly, in type 1 and type 2 diabetes, you're looking at effects outside of what the normal healthy range of insulin production is. And there you have very major effects. Because for healthy individuals, it's simply not as simple as insulin makes you fat. Usually, you can actually forget about the existence of insulin altogether, and you'll be pretty well off. The main factor, I'd say that there is one very significant main factor, and that is the obesity epidemic. I wrote an article on biosignature. Even if you're not interested in biosignature, I go into great deal into the relationship between changes in fat mass and hormones, which causes what. And the research actually strongly indicates, especially when it comes to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, that obesity has a much stronger effect on your hormones, in this case, insulin production, insulin sensitivity, than the other way around. So which is again what I said. If you can easily get lean on a very high carb diet, there's there's no issue with that as long as you respect energy balance. So um, that's not something that independently, unless you have a very strong genetic disposition for it, makes you fat. However, becoming fat very is almost without exception makes you insulin resistant because of the properties of fat mass itself. Many people think of fat as basically this inert storage depot in your body, but fat actually has many hormonal effects. It has blood vessels, even nerves in it. So it's very metabolically active. And many of the effects, especially those of visceral fat, which is the fat surrounding your organs, your belly, aren't very desirable beyond relatively little, beyond having relatively little fat. So an excess of fat creates a metabolic environment in your body, usually which is mediated by the liver, that makes you insulin resistant. Absolutely. I mean, I see a lot of my clients that do blood work, especially the ones where something's wrong, which is usually the people that are overweight. And they find a lot of things are usually borderline wrong or on the edge, or a few values are outside of the reference range: cholesterol, triglycerides, liver values, especially during resistance training, quite often as markers of blood health as well, actually. But a few things are outside of the reference range, and doctors may they're becoming more and more conservative, so that's good. But they may um, prescribe treatment for that, and almost always, if we just test it again in 2 months after a significant amount of fat loss has occurred, everything tends to normalize. It's like a general pattern you see in almost everyone. If they get really fat, things get out of whack, and if they just return to a healthy body fat percentage again, that solves the vast majority of problems. Yes, exactly. They're widely, hugely underrated, and there is a growing influence of doctors that lift basically, and they are recommending more and more exercise. And actually, if you look at the literature, you see that the effects of exercise and fat loss, and even some food interventions, can actually be much more powerful than drugs. We see this with the effects of vitamin A, for example, for disorders of the eye. We see this if you compare the effects of statins with simple weight loss, exercise, and balanced diet. The effects of just living a healthy lifestyle basically vastly outweigh what you can do pharmaceutically. Yeah. Oh yes, all the time. It's many people think, or they they like to believe, at least in some people, that you it's because you're spending all this time in the gym, and I do spend a lot of time in the gym. I work out every day, but you don't need to. You can, like we talked about, you can get great results with 3 sessions a week. So especially if you want to look fit in terms of the general population and not for a bodybuilding audience. So um, I think it's more of a mental coping mechanism that people think, if um, I could look like that if I spend all this time in the gym, but I don't want to do that. Or they think, I don't want that because that guy must feel miserable. Whereas usually it's more just envy or um, lack of self-esteem, basically. Mm-hmm. Definitely, I think the main problem is that people are humans by their very nature are herd animals. We're very social animals, and we base our perspectives on what is normal, what is good, what is pathological. I actually like that word because it basically implies that as something deviates more from conventional norms, at some point we actually call it an illness, a disease, simply by virtue of its unconventionality. But the problem now is that there is an obesity epidemic. 2/3 of people are overweight, and about 1/3 of people is obese. So the majority of people are now overweight. So what is considered normal simply by looking around you and not looking at the medical literature is actually very unhealthy. And if you look at people's diets, you look at what nutrients they are deficient in, people look around them and they think, my diet isn't that bad compared to that of other people. So I can't be at risk for any kind of serious disease. But what's really going on is that almost everyone is deficient in at least some nutrients. And if you look at the rates of deficiency of vitamin K, iron, especially in female athletes, zinc, magnesium, vitamin D, vitamin A as well, you're looking at huge percentages, very often above 50% in many populations, and especially in the general population, but even in many athletes. So what is considered normal in our society is quite distantly removed from what is healthy and what is remotely near optimal health. So the perspectives of normal and health do not align anymore. If you look at you're looking at hunter-gatherer cultures, then these mechanisms of determining what is healthy and normal lifestyle, they would make more sense. But now we are so far removed from that the, the normal perspective is completely skewed. exactly. That's the nature. I, I'd first state the obligatory disclaimers that you can't out supplement a bad diet, and supplements are, the final edge. And I think supplements are by far the most overrated aspect of the bodybuilding lifestyle. With that out of the way, creatine is probably simple creatine monohydrate. It's probably the most proven and I think definitely the most researched ergogenics or performance enhancer. It actually helps with building muscle if you're a responder to it, because some people don't respond to it because they, for example, already have saturated creatine stores themselves. So creatine is definitely something that's worth trying. Caffeine is a very simple. It's sort of an ergogenic because the dosages you have to use to actually increase physical performance capacity are actually too large to sustain, because you'll become extremely addicted very rapidly and lose the effects and feel really bad without the caffeine. So then the only benefit, still seems like caffeine is a huge benefit, but it's no longer that you actually perform better on the caffeine, just perform worse throughout the rest of the day. So I don't recommend using caffeine for that purpose, but using very low dose caffeine before your training sessions is a very effective way to get a mental motivation boost and make it easier, especially if you're only training a few times a week. I definitely recommend it if you tolerate it well to use caffeine, so that you're very motivated and you can go all out during that session. Fish oil. I'm not really a fan of fish oil itself. Actually, I prefer people rely on fish because of its greater bioavailability. And most fish oil supplements don't contain nearly as much omega-3 as is actually on the label. This is actually true for pretty much every supplement. And the fish oil is often of poor quality, it's oxidized, so that you're actually not paying. You want to pay for an anti-inflammatory fatty acid, but it's oxidized, so you're actually basically paying for poison. So yeah, that does happen a lot. The supplement literature it's really bad, the quality of the supplement industry. But vitamin D is another one that I recommend very often. If you don't live or have a job lifestyle that makes you be out in the sun for like 20 minutes a day with significant amount of coverage, and not just your hands and face, then you probably want to supplement vitamin D3, because it's very difficult to get enough sun. Tanning booths also work, by the way, but yeah, for competitors, that's a realistic option. Most people don't go to tanning booths often enough to get all their vitamin D from there. So caffeine, creatine, vitamin D. Two more you're already looking at lower percentages. Magnesium is something that I am recommending more and more, especially people on low carb diets. They don't consume a lot of grains, which are a somewhat decent source of magnesium, or at least it's one of the only decent sources many people have in the diet. So magnesium is something that is quite often deficient. It's very important for athletes, so definitely worth considering. On the other hand, for these kind of things, I really emphasize that you just want to get it tested, because many people are happy to spend years and years buying magnesium supplements, which vastly outweighs the price of simply having it tested and seeing what you actually need and what you don't need. Beyond that, zinc and magnesium are sort of on the same level, which is why you had ZMA being formed supplement. So zinc is sort of the same story as magnesium. If you don't consume red meat regularly in your diet, it's very difficult to consume enough zinc. Other supplements and minerals and vitamins are, you could argue they're just as useful, but they're not as directly relevant for your body composition. So it's more for optimal health and not your physique. So other performance enhancers, you have citrulline and beta-alanine. Not really convinced they do anything. If you do very high volume training with very high reps, they may increase your performance a little bit, but it still remains to be seen if that actually benefits muscle growth or strength development, especially in citrulline, because the interesting thing about these supplements is that you're often buffering metabolic stress. But metabolic stress is in itself actually a stimulus for muscle growth. So you are basically exchanging metabolic stress for the ability to induce more mechanical tension and stimulate your muscles more. But it's debatable if simply having less mechanical tension with higher metabolic stress would not actually achieve the same effect. So I'm not really sold on those. And as far as muscle growth and actual fat loss, you're really not looking at anything that's really effective, that's legal. Oh yes, definitely. I've done that. I've gone months without any supplements, and right now I take caffeine and melatonin because I have insomnia. But that's it. So it's been months since I've had touched anything else. I'm a creatine non-responder. At least I'm quite sure I am. Still want to test it one more time. Otherwise, I'd be taking that. Yeah, that's really it. My diet's pretty good, so I don't think I need any supplementation. I've had blood work done. Everything's normal. So for me, it's diet and exercise, and supplementation is just usually just if I supplement, it's almost always nootropics or things that have a mental effect, like caffeine and melatonin, and not really something that's essential to my actual body composition development. Mm. Like 3 micrograms. Yeah, I wouldn't say that there is huge variation, but there are definitely some people that respond differently to it, and you'll see this in research. In general, 3 milligrams is a very good starting point, good dosage that most people respond to. If you respond to melatonin at all, because if your body produces enough of it on its own, it doesn't do anything. If it does anything, it's just placebo. But certain individuals, and I'm maybe one of them, respond a little better. You also see this in research. The 5 milligrams tends to outperform 3 milligrams on average, but you're looking at effects seen in only a few studies, and not as a general rule. And then you have a minority of people that actually do much better on very small dosages, probably because they already produce a lot of it themselves, or they're very sensitive to it. Usually, those are basically two sides of the same coin. So these people, you get those. You actually get really small, which is why I mentioned zero point 0.3 micrograms. It's like a homeopathic dosage almost, and that actually seems to work well. Other people, you're looking at like things like half a milligram. They would just respond well to just a little bit, basically. So yeah, that definitely occurs. Def- what I would like to see, um, it's always good to see more of a movement towards evidence-based fitness. Um, I think that is happening, but I mean, realistically, it will never become the mainstream because the science-based ideas are often too complicated. Like energy balance principle, I just told you, it's not sexy and it's just a little too complicated to really make it to the mainstream, which is why you often see programs like Weight Watchers, for example. They basically simplify calorie counting and they have this point system, which is just a proxy for calorie counting. But anyway, what I'd like to see, more funding for science, probably. That's just my selfish uh, need. I'd like to see there be more funding for science, and then I think that will happen, and it's happening at least in nutrition and research for weight loss, because obesity has literally reached epidemic proportions, and society is going to need to do something about that. And scientific research is usually the way forward in terms of advances. So I think that will happen, and I'm pretty um, pretty optimistic about um, fitness, the whole fitness industry. It's only going to get better, I think. I'm probably going to go more into the education direction over time, but I'm quite content where I am now. I have my Bayesian PT course. It's doing really well as 145 members, I think. Um, so that's a 6 month course, and I do that once or twice a year, and that's going really well. I still do full time coaching, where I have clients and help them improve their physique. And those are basically the two main things I'm doing. And probably over time, I'm going to lean more towards the PT course. And as a project I'm working on that's sort of nearly finalized, the cybernetic fitness, where Norwegian colleague Birgit Fagerli and I have basically automated um, personal training using artificially intelligent software. It's a project that's been in the works for about a year and a half now. Um, yeah, so when that goes live, I'll have more time to develop to education, and I'll probably gonna try to get an external PhD. I'm not gonna do the whole for a year, a 4 year course. That's way too much time to spend on it. But it's gonna be like more like a labor of love slash hobby to get a PhD and go more towards the education direction, and then I'll see what I can where it goes, because I'm getting more and more contacts from the industry and education providers. I'm working with the Intelligent Strength now in Vienna, Austria. I'm working with the Norwegian Academy for Personal Training. In the Netherlands, we have Fits on the Fables. That's also a very large evidence-based fitness platform. So a lot of these evidence-based kind of fitness organizations are popping up, and I think there is a future there in terms of education provision. Yes, BayesianBodybuilding.com. If you can spell Bayesian, I think I'm the #1 hit on Google for exercise selection, or at least my article is. Optimal protein intake, I think I'm also #1 hit on Google. So those things will also get you there. So, sure. Nice talking to you.